Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is 11:11 a.m. and I want to welcome you to the channel. It is your favorite warlock, necromancer, and practicing dark sorcerer. So today I want to kind of discuss with you some of the views when working with deities. Okay. And when just about every religion you have, even philosophy worldwide, you have deities that you work with, be it demons, jinn, Orisha, Loa, you know, or ancestral spirits, whatever. Even the old pagan gods of, say, the left hand path or right hand path perspectives all have deities that those who work with death magic actually utilize. Like, say, necromancy, we would summon the gods of the underworld. Okay. And whereas most practitioners would most likely be calling on the gods of the light, such as those of the heavens. Okay. So, when we get into the actual practices, I mean, we know most people only know their traditions as they're taught today, such as in Latin America, we see, let's go with Oya, the Impero Mayambi Santeria, you know, this is the Orisha of the dead, okay? Baron Semedi, or say Baroness Dembella, okay, and Vudan, okay? These are the god and goddess of death. They're basically the personification of death. So when we get into noticing, even say for an example, let's go with uh, Santa Morte. Okay, she's one of the biggest folk saints out there today. Okay, a lot of people throughout South America, Central America, and southern portions of the United States, not just Portugal, for an example, they they all worship her as a saint. But if you look at her image and how she's always stands with the mala beads, and or in this case the rosary, for an example, you're looking at the Catholic saint, the mother of Jesus herself, Mary. Okay. And basically she was made into a folk saint for Saint Death. And don't get me wrong, Santa Morte is perhaps one of the most powerful folk saints out there today that can transcend multitudes of dimensions and planes of existence. And I do work with her quite often, not just the old gods. So let's let's kind of just talk about a few perceptions here. And when we think of gods of the underworld, a lot of people go to either Anubis or that of, say, Hades. Now, we all know the story of the Greek gods. Okay, we know that Zeus was the ruler of the heavens, the celestial body. You had Poseidon, who was the ruler of the seas, the seven seas. And then you had Hades, the lord of the underworld. But a lot of people don't realize the role that Hades really took on. In a lot of the old texts, he is a spirit of divine wisdom. Okay. He was one of the few gods in Greek mythology that handled himself with prestige. Okay. He understood his role as ruler of the underworld. And it was interesting because his position wasn't made manifest until the three well, let's just call them the three titans of the underworld. They were like the prophesiers, they were like the three wise women, okay, that basically fed him the the tests and the trials and basically taught him the meaning of being a ruler. What it would be like the wise men of a court in a king's courts, teaching that young prince, that young king and queen, princess wise, what it's like to actually be a ruler. Because when you think about this, when you step into a position of authority, number one, you basically are no longer friends with everyone else. Okay. They're basically all of a sudden it's like they're pulling back because now you're an authority. You're now upper management, so to speak. So in this instance, it's more of the fact that he became feared because now he's this all powerful embodiment of the underworld, hell, if you wish. And a lot of people, especially in the world today, they still fear death. So when they see the embodiment of Hades, they don't think about how wise he is as a ruler of the underworld. They don't stop to think that he gave tests and trials and how he literally managed the underworld within three portions: the Elysium Fields, the Asphodel Meadows, and Hades itself, where his job literally was and is to, how should I say this, guide souls to where they're meant to be, depending on how they lived in life. Okay, and it's interesting because if we go into Nordic mythology, we see Hel. She was the daughter of Loki, and it was interesting because Hel was actually one of those characters that reported to Odin. Okay, she basically was this beautiful goddess that she ruled the underworld with respect. It used to be seen as she was the one that welcomed new souls to the underworld, to the land of the dead. And later it became associated with grotesqueness and filth and vileness, impurity, much like all the others. And then in Japanese traditions, you have how do you pronounce this? It's Izanami. Okay. Hope I got that correct. Now, Izanami was a goddess that ruled the beginning area with with Izanagi. Okay. And what's interesting is they tried to create an island, and they tried to create children, and she ended up dying, okay, from childbirth. And if you think about it, that's probably why Wiccans and pagans today worship the mother figure because of the creation process. So, and it's kind of cool because if you think about it, after she died, her mate and partner Izanagi, he basically went to the underworld, the land of the dead, and to get her back. And by that time, she had already fed from the fruits of the underworld. And that link was unbreakable. So he ended up pulling a big boulder in front of that cave. And a lot of stories from mythology and astrology have shown that there are certain locations on the earth that allow you to travel to the underworld. And this goes back to the Paleolithic era, so it's nothing new. So it was interesting because instead of this beautiful goddess, she is now viewed as grotesque, decaying, just like any other spirit or vessel. Okay. So when we go into, by the time we get into Egyptian mythology, Osiris is known as the Lord of Iniquity. He's also known as the ruler of the underworld. Okay. The story goes that he was assassinated by Ra, the sun god. And it was his mate, Isis, the mother of witchcraft, who became associated with necromancy and the underworld through her relationship with, in some cases, the adopted son Anubis. Okay, and Anubis is known as the embalmer, the protector of tombs, the guide of souls, and most importantly, the wearer of hearts. And in a lot of cases, I found that this is really an interesting story because in some texts, depending on the era, eh, Anubis is actually the ruler of the underworld. But in other texts, it's Osiris. So, in essence, when we actually look at Egyptian mythology, Osiris is actually the guider of souls. He's the protector. Okay, so it's very interesting to see where there's a difference in a classification of this because, like Osiris, Anubis actually put a test forth to find the true nature of the spirit, to find out where they were meant to go. On one hand, you had the feather, and on the other hand, you had the heart, and then you had the crocodile. The lord of the Nile. Okay, who would devour the soul in the heart, if it was found impure of nature. So it was kind of cool. And when we get into the iniquity aspect of Osiris, we see where he has the scale. And on one side you have a feather, and on the other side you have the gold. Okay. Now, he basically judges your own iniquity. Basically, it's like that self-made curse, you are in charge of your own condemnation, basically. So if you're feeling guilty about it, well, guess what? You're fucked. But if you are found innocent, and it's kind of cool because you basically get off scot-free. But if you're used from a practitioner's point of view, you're linked in with Hecate as well. So the goddess of necromancy, goes to the underworld, and justice, of Greek mythology. So, but it's kind of cool because you got these two images of the scale between these two Egyptian gods. And it was said that if the scale, the feather and the heart were equal weight and they stayed equal, then you would go to the heavens. But if the heart was heavier than the feather, then you would go to hell, okay, so to speak. So we're seeing that common goal there, and it's kind of cool. It's really a shame to see how these gods and goddesses end up getting corrupted, and then by the time we get into Incan traditions, we have Inti, the god of the sun god, versus that of, say, Supay, the god of death. And he was most feared because he was always about that sorcery. He was always about that power behind death magic. So, in essence, he was actually one of the first true necromancers, if you think about it, that ascended into the underworld and became a very potent symbol of death. And of course, we all know the last 1,000 years or 2,500 years worth of Satan, being the ruler of the underworld. In some cases, we view this as Lucifer, the archangel who was cast out of heaven. Isaiah 14:12. Okay, compared to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, where Satan, he becomes Satan, and Satan is the god of this world, and they always use the little g. So it's like, why don't you just use it the way it is? Because the god of this world is Satan. Okay, because if you actually read biblical lore, okay, Satan is the only name mentioned for the Lord of this world. It's not the, Jehovah, it is not Jesus. Nowhere in the fucking Bible does it say that, guess what? Jesus is the Lord, or that Yahweh or Jehovah is the God of this world. No, it says very clearly the only name of the God of this world, and they use a little g, is Satan. Okay. And it's interesting because if you go into grimoire systems, a lot of time Satan is associated with pride. Okay. But if you go into the history of witchcraft and sorcery, it is Beelzebuth that is the Lord of the witches' Sabbath. Okay. So you really have to understand history and mythology, not just from a religious perspective, but a folkloric and philosophical perspective. If we go into, for an example, let's go with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, the Scroll of Amber. We see Belial being the ruler of the sons and daughters of darkness. Okay, this is spoken of in the Old Testament. Okay, we go into, say, for an example, let's go with the book of Tobit. Okay, in the book of Tobit, Asmodeus or Asmodai becomes evil because he is so infatuated with lust for a human woman that he becomes this murderous monster, and he becomes demonized. Okay, if you go into Islamic traditions, Asmodeus is was actually a man that ascended into an archdemon position. Okay, so you really have to understand where these mythologies and histories come from. It's not, as the Christians say, it is actually something far more older. Okay, so for an example, the one thing all of these tales have in common is when you go to the underworld as a soul or a spirit, it is said that two things happen. One, you become so hungry that you eat the fruits of that underworld, of the underworld, or that of the celestial. Okay, or it is forced upon you. Okay, to make you into that demon. Okay, so in Catholicism we have what is known as heaven, hell, and purgatory. But if you look at the Greek underworld and where Hades actually ruled over, you have Elysium, the asphodel meadows, and that of Hades, where he ruled over and he guided those souls to those locations. But as time went on, those who ruled the underworld became hideous. They became grotesque. So even today, when we look at death, death is something that is considered to be impure. It is considered to be vile. Okay. So if you compare death to trash, you're basically, if you go into your trash can or a dumpster, that's how vile people view death, today. If you go into India, for an example, there's such a high death rate there that if you associate yourself like a gravedigger, a mortician, or somebody who constantly surrounds yourself with death, like say a minister or a priest, okay, then people are going to give you a wide berth. They don't want nothing to do with you because you're filth. You've been contaminated. Okay. This is also seen in Egyptian mythology when we get into the Shem priesthood. Shem priesthood is called Sem. That's how it's spelled. Sem. And they were the ones that performed the rites from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the green emerald even, and they did the embalming aspect. They were the ones that dealt with the community, they dealt with the family, they dealt with the upkeep of the temple, okay? They were the ones responsible for praying to the gods. They were the intermediaries to the gods, and it's interesting how late some of the times these individuals were run out of town after performing these rites because the texts really show how you had one person cleansing the body. I'm talking washing it down, cleansing it, and while another was making that incision and being like a mortician in removing the four vital organs. Then you had another one down at the feet begin mummifying that that vessel, that corpse, the cadaver. Okay, and it's very interesting to view just how these priests had played a vital role. Even later on, when we changed the roles, you now have grave diggers, you have funeral home directors, you have morticians, you have um, doctors who their main purpose is to diagnose you. You're going to die, okay? Or you are dead. They're the ones that declare you dead. They're the only ones legally allowed to declare you dead, deceased. And that's just from a physical perspective. I mean, that's why thanatology was created in 1903 and became a part of the medical community back in 1974. Okay. I mean, even today, thanatology, which is the study of death, much like the art of dying, today known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the study of death. You know, there's always that connection between the living and the dead. You have the necropolis, which is the city of the dead. Okay, every community worldwide has seen this in their stories. They have gateways, they have portals, they have, um, well, Jacob's ladder is the best way I could put it to you, where you're able to ascend and descend. Invocations and evocations, soul travel, you name it. There are so many tools and methods to get into this stuff from a practitioner's perspective and as tools. So there is a lot of methods and a lot of tools to go into it, but it's only the limited perspective of the individual today, which is arrogance. And if you think about it, the great liberator of the human today is the will. The great motivation is will. The will to go forward, the will to manifest that result, and the will to study and learn and grow. Okay, learning and education today is basically the devil's handiwork, so to speak. So keep that in mind. And Kyle, welcome to the channel, and same with you, Death. That's actually true, Kyle. Very much true. And history, I've always said that if history, mythology, and folklore doesn't align, don't believe it. Because it's like using words and actions. If they're not aligned and they're not going hand in hand, then most likely it is a corrupted version. Especially since they don't teach the sources and where they come from. For an example, the Zohar, the Jewish Haggadah, the Talmud, the Mishra, the Book of Tobit, Jewish demonology, you name it. Even the Sanskrit scroll of Amrit, like I said, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they all these are just these are just some texts that go as far back as the first dynasties of most cultures. They deal with what Satan's role was. He was a Gorgori, a watcher angel. He was known as the chief, and now suddenly, according to the poetical text, he replaced Beelzebuth back in the, what was it, the 17th century, I think it was. It was either 16th or 17th century when this text came out, and basically it corroborates the 3 days that Jesus of Nazareth spent in the underworld. Okay, he got the keys and everything to death, and basically he removed Beelzebub from his throne as Lord of the Witches, and Satan became the new ruler of the underworld. Okay, that was back around the 16th, 17th century when that text came out. So I mean, knowing this, how would you believe and why would you believe the corrupted, limited perspective of the JCI, the Judo Christian institutions? You know, and basically it's was more a play for power than anything when it came to the JCI. They wanted to be the top religion. They wanted to be the ruling embodiment because they truly believed that they were right and everyone else was wrong. But yet, how could everybody else have the same stories, the same mythos, and Christianity seems to be the ones that are correct? No. Christianity has only been around since the second century. And the ironic part is, if you look at the roles of male and female within these religions, the females used to walk side by side with the males. They were seen as equals. And then all of a sudden they became lesser beings, second class citizens, where they had to walk one step behind the male. They were viewed less important. And then all of a sudden, now they have to answer to the males. Yeah, right. Go back through history, mythology, archaeology, and folklore, and you'll see a whole different story. So, but that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, and kind of give you that perspective of the agents of death that we worship and that we work with as necromancers, Satanists, and practitioners of dark arts. So, kind of give you that little taste, if you will. So, I want to thank Kyle for jumping on here with me and Death. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. And until next time, I'm out.